All right, everyone. So this is our last set of notes for World War One. So this is the end of the war, and I included this quote here from Kaiser Wilhelm II. The war to end all wars created a peace to end all peace, and he was absolutely correct. So the decisions that will come out of the Paris Peace Conference is pretty much going to set up a lot of the conflicts that we actually see in our world today. So from 1917 to 1918, we'll see some changes that are going to take place. As I mentioned on Tuesday, that Russia is going to end up with two revolutions in 1917. You'll have the March Revolution, which the people will overthrow the Tsar and he'll be forced to abdicate. And then they will establish a provisional government that's supposed to eventually have a constituent assembly that would be elected. They've also promised that eventually they will give the land to the peasants and the factories to the workers, but they are going to stay in the war. And at this point, the people would really like for this new government to fulfill their promises, but also get out of the war. So in the fall of 1917, November of 1917, the Bolsheviks and the Soviets, and this will be under the leadership of Lenin and Trotsky, they will overthrow the provisional government. Now, that one is going to be a revolution that we will see will be very well organized, where the one that took place in the spring was actually spontaneous. And when Lenin was allowed to come back into Russia, and we'll go more into that after spring break, one of the things that he had promised to do was pull Russia out of the war. And that is what he and Trotsky did. They ended up signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. Unfortunately, that meant they had to give up a lot of their territory in Eastern Europe, that it pretty much went to Germany because Germany could use the resources from that land in their war effort. And it also allowed them to focus on one front instead of two. But at the same time, we now have, we left off on Tuesday where the Americans had declared war. They're joining in. And so in early 1918 now, American troops are actually showing up in Europe um, with our government, with our military, because there were Americans who had actually joined up throughout the war because they felt the United States should have been involved, but we just weren't physically involved as a nation and military. And so the Allied forces will win at the Second Battle of the Marne. Um, Kaiser Wilhelm II's advisors will strongly urge him to abdicate, so he will resign his position, and then he is actually going to go and live in the Netherlands, which is neutral during the war. And that's going to be a little dilemma because the Big Four will want to hold him responsible for everything that happened. But he's in a neutral territory, and can you really go and drag the man out of a nation that's neutral? Because then you're looking like an aggressor, just like they looked at the start of this war. So he gets to stay in the Netherlands. He gets to live a peaceful life, and nothing happens to him. He just knows he can't go back to Germany. So Germany will send word, actually, and this is going to irritate Great Britain and France. They will send word to the United States that they are ready for an armistice, a cease fighting, where they can all sit down to the table and negotiate some kind of peace settlement. And the reason that they are sending it to the United States is because in January of 1914, Woodrow Wilson had presented his peace plan, the 14 points, to Congress. And there are some items in that peace plan that seems like he will be the level-headed person at the negotiating table. And they were really hoping that that would be the case. Now, the armistice, again, this is just a cease-fighting, but Germany agreed to give up quite a bit of stuff in this armistice. They also agreed not to destroy things when they retreated. They also agreed that they are fully responsible for the destruction of Belgium. I mean, yeah, they invaded. But they were hoping that by establishing an armistice that would show that they are willing to give up so much, that the Allied forces would take that in consideration when they sat down at the peace talks at the end of this war. Yeah, that's really not going to happen because they also put in the armistice that after every so many days, things have to be renewed or they go back to fighting. So the Allied forces, particularly France, is not really wanting to play nicely because this is their moment. This is payback for that Franco-Prussian War. And they're going to pull out a railway car, similar to the railway car that they had to sign that Treaty of Frankfurt. And France is actually going to not release that they had signed the armistice because they said that they're going to wait a few more hours so they could kill just a few more Germans before this thing is over and done with. So now we are looking at who's going to be the representatives at the Paris Peace Conference. So the big four is made up of David Lloyd George of Great Britain, their prime minister, Georges Clemenceau, prime minister of France, Vittorio Orlando, prime minister of Italy, and then the United States is President Woodrow Wilson. You'll notice that Russia is not included. Russia will actually be excluded from this. Let me go ahead. Oh, yep. Okay. I'll get over that in a moment. So Russia and Germany are not invited. And right there is a potential problem. So let's look a little bit at Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. And you'll notice that January, the war is still happening. We are in the last year of the war. So January 1918, Woodrow Wilson, our U.S. president, presents his peace plan to Congress. We know that the way our government works, he does need their permission, their approval of a lot of the ideas that he's going to throw out there, particularly the baby of all of this, his League of Nations. You know, I'm not going to list all 14 points. I just have some of the top 5, and then I do include a couple on the next slide. The idea of self-determination, that you have the right to establish a government free of foreign control. Now, that's something that is speaking to everyone. Colonial areas, you know, wow, I don't have to be a colony anymore. I could actually be free of foreign control. Even Germany likes this because, you know, we're at the end of a war. Are they going to have to give up territory? What about their people in those territories? You know, militarism was one of our main causes of this war. And Woodrow Wilson points that out, that, you know, they all need to disarm. You know, that mess in Europe, they really need to stop and look at themselves, you know, because they all played a role in this building up their military, this flexing of muscle, this mobilizing their troops, this arms race that's been going on. So they really need to take a step back. And what's really important here is that when Woodrow Wilson is mentioning disarmament, he means all of them, not just Germany. It should be all of them. And this next point here is the one where Germany is thinking, yep, that's our guy. We want him there at the negotiating table, because he says there needs to be peace without victory. Yes, Germany and her allies should be punished for their role in this war. However, it should not be a harsh punishment, because that's only going to lead to revenge in the future. And it's really interesting that in January of 1918, this is the stance that Woodrow Wilson is taking. But by the time we get to May and June of 1919, he's on a completely different level because of the wheeling and dealing that's been going on back and forth between the big four. He kind of loses sight not only of the peace without victory, but also that self-determination. Another point he has is the fair treatment of colonial people. So if you have certain basic rights that are provided to your citizens, it should be applied to your colonial people as well. That was our complaint as a colony to Great Britain. That English Bill of Rights we thought applied to us because we were, quote, British citizens, but then they rudely told us, no, you're not, you're just a colony. Well, he's pointing out that you have certain rights. It needs to be applied to everyone within your empire, within your kingdom, within your country, whether they are in your homeland or not. Yeah, we know that is not something that's going to fly with Great Britain and France. And then League of Nations. Oh, oops, sorry about that. I need to stop touching the screen. The League of Nations really becomes his baby. He is willing to sacrifice all of the other points just to get his League of Nations. And David Lloyd George and Clemenceau see right through him. They know they can dangle that over his head anytime they want to get their way. And really, when they head to the Paris Peace Conference, it's like France is asking for the stars and the moon because they know they can't get all of it, but let's ask for everything and then be able to whittle it down to what we are comfortable with. David Lloyd George went into the Paris Peace, he was elected to his position saying that he could get $300 billion in reparations from Germany for just Great Britain. Like, that's not even realistic. None of the countries could have paid $300 billion. But they know that everything they want to take out of Germany or any of the other countries in Europe, all they have to do to Woodrow Wilson is say, well, we're not going to join your League of Nations if you don't give it to us. And he caves every time. This whole idea of the League of Nations, we saw it play out with the Concert of Europe, but we also saw they ended up stabbing each other in the back, and that fell through. So they want this international organization, or I should say Woodrow Wilson wants this international organization that would actually help solve future problems between nations. It would also meet periodically, just like they did with the Concert of Europe, to make sure that the new boundaries that were created, the new countries that will be established, are still protected and that no one's causing any problems. We're going to see that there's going to be some problems with the League of Nations, but right now, this is like his child, his baby, and he's hoping that he can get everyone on board. Other points: freedom of the seas, free trade. This was something that Great Britain desperately needed. Being an island and having all of her trade routes, she definitely needs access. She definitely needs trade to open back up between countries. And actually, the first of his point is actually an end to secret treaties, which is laughable because France and Great Britain had already created their own little secret treaties. They had secretly forced an armistice with the Ottoman Empire so they could start carving it up before Woodrow Wilson could step in. They had already decided how they were going to split up Germany's colonies over in Africa. So this idea of secret treaties needs to go away. Yeah, not happening because two of his allies had already started to create their own. So, as I pointed out earlier, Germany had agreed to the armistice based off of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points and hoping that Woodrow Wilson would come in and be that level headed person, that mediator, when they all sat down to negotiate this settlement. But France was not having any of it, particularly Clemenceau. He was around during the Franco-Prussian War. So this was it. This was Germany has to pay for all of that damage. And when they looked at it, they also wanted to point out, look how much they suffered in deaths. How many were wounded? Look at the destruction in northern France. Really, what happened in the United States? They didn't have any battles there. And there was a quote from Clemenceau where he actually questioned, and he was, it's a rude quote where he said, Moses, God gave Moses 10 commandments, and why in the world do you think you can come here with 14? Kind of paraphrasing his quote, but pointing out that who does Woodrow Wilson think he is? No one's going to bow down to this man. And actually, by the time they get to the end of the conference, Woodrow Wilson is so bashed in the public, the newspapers, that he goes home a very sad man. At the Paris Peace Conference, we are going to end up settling 5 separate treaties, and the treaties' names are where they ended up signing them. But Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire all receive separate treaties. And you'll also notice here that the Ottoman Empire, or Turkey, ends up with 2. So when you look at these treaties that come out the end of World War I, Turkey and Germany received some pretty harsh treaties. And actually, I think the one with Germany, That's a matter of perspective on that one because it really could have been a lot worse. But Turkey really got the raw deal here. I mean, it was so bad that with the first one, the people rose up and rebelled, and then the Allies were like, "Yeah, we probably went too far on that one," and went back and had to do another treaty. I mean, goodness, Bulgaria signed an armistice at the end of the war, but the war was still happening, just so the next day they could declare war on the side of the Allies so that they would be on the winning side and be able to take land and ports from Turkey. And France and Great Britain allowed them to do it. It's like, you guys are just completely ridiculous here. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are countries that were not invited to the Paris Peace Conference, and this is going to cause some tension. I mean, if you recall, at the Congress of Vienna, France was allowed to attend. I mean, my goodness, they allowed France to even make some decisions. But here they told Germany, sit at home and we'll let you know. And, when to show up. And when you show up, it's to sign the documents. And for the German troops, when they went back home to parades where people were cheering for them. So Germany did not see that they lost this war. They saw that it was a long 4-year war. Everyone was pretty much devastated and it was time to just stop it. Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, they were not invited. And then Russia. No one liked the government that had taken over the provisional government. So Russia, it's like, we will ignore you until we have to look at you again, which won't be until World War II. So when we look at the Treaty of Versailles, and these are some of the things that come out of it. Germany, we look at the territorial changes. They have to give back Alsace and Lorraine. And that was even in Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. He even referred to it as a wrong that happened in 1871 that needs to be made right, that effective immediately, Alsace and Lorraine goes back to France. Self-determination not going to be applied. The Polish corridor was set up, and that was territory that was splitting East Prussia from Germany, but it was also being used as the new country that gets to come back. Poland finally gets to show back up on the map. It gave them access to Danzig, which was a German port, but now it's going to be a free trading city controlled by the League of Nations. And the hope here is that giving Poland access to Danzig will actually help build them up economically so then they can be the powerhouse in the East that can keep Russia and Germany at bay. They have to hand over all of their colonies. And this was something that the German delegates were like, what are you talking about? They take all of their African colonies, France and Great Britain split them up, and then there are some territories they have in the Pacific that will go to Japan. Now, this wasn't because Great Britain wanted to give those islands to Japan. Japan, quote, freed them or liberated them from Germany during the war, and they weren't handing them over, which really irritated Great Britain. And disarmament. Remember I mentioned under the 14 points, the whole idea that everyone should be disarming? Well, nope, it's just going to be Germany. That's who has to disarm. Even though Austria has some things in theirs, but no one's going to force them to do it. So they cannot militarize along the Rhine, which is right between France and Germany. They have to reduce their army to 100,000 men, and they can only be volunteer only. They cannot have a draft. Navy is limited to a small fleet, and their heavy artillery, tanks, warplanes, submarines, all of that's gone. And the funny thing is that from the armistice, Great Britain had already picked apart the heavy artillery, the tanks, the warplanes, the submarines, all the stuff they wanted to keep. Oh, darn. Okay, I'm going to keep on going here. Article 231 was the war guilt clause, where Germany had to take full blame for the war, not only for her actions, but also for the actions of her allies. Because she gave that blank check at the beginning to Austria-Hungary, they said that Austria would not have been too aggressive in going after Serbia, so they have to take full blame. And then the reparations. Germany will be told that they're not going to give the actual fee that they have to pay when they sign the document, that they needed to wait. And that was really because they didn't want the people in France and Great Britain to rise up, because unfortunately, communism was running rampant. And as Trotsky said, the time was ripe. They really could have led a full-on revolution. So it wasn't until 1920, 1921 that a commission came together and gave the $33 billion bill to Germany. And Germany was upset because they said, you're forcing us to sign a treaty, a blank check. And they're like, well, you know what? You started the war with it. And you'll note here that they didn't pay it off in full until October 3rd of 2010, but we'll talk about why that happens a little later. Other decisions, there's creation of some new countries. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Austria-Hungary are split, and Poland gets to come back on the map. Hopefully you're noting that, there's a lot of different ethnic groups that are making up these areas, but no one's really talking to them or asking them where they want to go. And it's going to be future problems. The Ottoman Empire has been split up between England and France, and yeah, they give Greece just a little bit just so they pretty much be quiet. But now we're not going to have colonies, we're going to have mandate systems. It's the same thing. They're going to treat these mandates exactly as they did their colonies in our imperialism unit. And then here are the unresolved problems. League of Nations, the United States, Germany, Russia are not members. And we presented this idea, and we are not even joining in. They don't even have a military to back them. The women get the right to vote, but we still have our unresolved problems. And one of the things that Japan was hoping was a racial equality clause added to the Covenant of the League. Didn't happen. They're going to be treated like second-class citizens. And then I included this political cartoon because I think it's a cool one to look at, of how it says, here Orlando has returned to Paris and the Big Four are in harmony again, and he's returned. So apparently there was issues. All four of these men would throw fits and temper tantrums and threaten to leave and then come back and forth. And you see that war and all the things that are still looming behind us. All right, that is it. And I have to head to class. See you guys later.